Donald Trump has what's called an expansive view of presidential power. Just a fancy way of saying he pushes the limits. And this becomes a legal issue when, for example, Trump uses the US military as domestic police, or carries out large-scale deportations, or makes wholesale structural cuts to the federal workforce. But when it comes to tariffs,
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
the Trumpiest of legal arguments that we've just heard at the highest level has to do with this. Call it the donut hole theory of presidential power. And I think we can use this to explain whether the highest court in the land believes Trump's tariffs are legal or go too far. Wipe your mind clean just for a second. Imagine you're at home. The US president walks into the room and says, I have an idea. Tariffs on all imports, all foreign goods that come into America. Your first reaction should be, what are you doing in my house? But your second reaction should be, you can't do that without Congress saying you can do it. That's because of a foundational clause in the US Constitution which says Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes and duties. And that's almost universally interpreted as meaning only Congress has that power, not the president, unless it's an emergency.
The question here is whether Congress has given over that power, delegated it to the executive branch in this statute, in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Yes, Trump's legal case really hinges on this idea that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, which he has invoked, whether it allows him to undertake a huge range of actions against foreign powers. And it really is like a parade of actions. The president can investigate, block, regulate, direct and compel, nullify, void, prevent, or prohibit a great number of things, including any acquisition, holding, withholding, use, transfer, withdrawal, transportation, importation, or exportation of, or dealing in or exercising any right, power, or privilege. So he can do all these things with regard to a whole range of things, affecting this massive umbrella category of any property in which any foreign country or a national thereof has any interest. But let me simplify, because among this massive buffet of options, the power of the president that matters in this case, that he may regulate the importation of basically any property.
IEPA confers major powers to address major problems on the president, who is perhaps the most major actor in the realm of foreign affairs.
Yes. Okay, but get to the donuts already. You may be shouting at your screen. Fine. So, in the Supreme Court hearing, Trump appointee Justice Brett Kavanaugh pointed out an odd donut hole. This idea that, isn't it a bit strange that IEPA grants the president such sweeping powers, that's this delicious pastry, but that if he's not allowed to impose tariffs as part of those powers, that's kind of a gaping hole in the middle of things the president is supposed to be able to do. Like in this circle of presidential powers, you mean to tell me that we all agree the president can do such drastic things as ban all trade with a particular country, impose quotas, all kinds of things, but he or she can't even impose something as simple as a 1% tariff to achieve the same goal? Isn't that a very strange, almost arbitrary limitation on what should otherwise be a complete circle of presidential power?
Why would a rational Congress say, yeah, we're going to give the president the power to shut down trade? I mean, think about the effects. But you're admitting that power's in there.
Yeah.
But can't do a 1% tariff. That doesn't seem, but I want to get your answer, to have a lot of common sense behind it.
I think it absolutely does, because it's a fundamentally different power. It's not a donut hole. It's a different kind of pastry.
And on that power, that's a good one.
So, as it turns out, Trump's tariffs in their current form may live or die on this question of whether we're talking about donuts or a different kind of pastry. Are they part of these broad IEPA powers?
We don't contend that what's being exercised here is the power to tax. It's the power to regulate foreign commerce.
Or are they really just taxes?
Tariffs are taxes. They take dollars from Americans' pockets and deposit them in the U.S. Treasury. Our founders gave that taxing power to Congress alone. Yet here the president bypassed Congress and imposed one of the largest tax increases in our lifetimes.
What might seem tricky here for the Trump administration is that Trump himself has often used the words tariff and tax interchangeably.
A tariff is a tax on a foreign country. That's the way it is, whether you like it or not. A lot of people like to say, oh, it's a tax on us. No. It's a tax on a foreign country. It's a tax on a country that's ripping us off and stealing our jobs. And it's a tax that doesn't affect our country.
But set that aside, because Trump says all sorts of things that may not actually legally affect what the emergency powers statute allows him to do. Not impose taxes, per se, but the power to regulate imports.
These are regulatory tariffs. They are not revenue-raising tariffs. The fact that they raise revenue is only incidental. The tariffs would be most effective, so to speak, if no person ever paid them.
And this is an important point, because if you accept that these tariffs are more like regulatory foreign policy tools, a way to hurt countries, and not so much a form of domestic taxation, then not only might this feel like a legit emergency power, according to the powers granted by IEEPA, it might also be something that very typically feels like a legit presidential power, regardless.
Generally speaking, there's more deference given to the president when the actions are in the realm of foreign affairs. Now, the power to tax and impose duties, that's with Congress. The power over foreign affairs, foreign relations, that's with the president.
Now, again, just as an aside, this might have felt like a stronger argument if the Trump administration wasn't constantly talking about the money side of tariffs.
So we're making $2 billion. This isn't 35 million, that's peanuts. $2 billion a day. Hundreds of billions of dollars of cash is pouring into our country now. I'll tell you where it came from. It came from a place called Tariffs.
But have a listen to how the Supreme Court, both liberal and conservative-leaning justices, responded.
Yes, of course, tariffs in dealings with foreign powers, but the vehicle is imposition of taxes on Americans, and that has always been the core power of Congress.
Let me say two things in response to that. First, the notion that the taxes are all borne by Americans and are not borne by foreign producers whose goods are imported is empirically, there's no basis for that in the record. It's actually a mix.
Well, who pays the tariffs? If a tariff is imposed on automobiles, who pays them?
I just don't understand this argument. It's not an article. It's a congressional power, not a presidential power to tax. And you want to say tariffs are not taxes, but that's exactly what they are. They're generating money from American citizens, revenue.
And if we think again to just how much money the government has managed to raise through such a sweeping overhaul of the global economy, this begs another question. You know what's funny about all this parsing of language? Like, are tariffs about revenue or regulation? Are they more domestic or foreign-facing? What's funny is that the mere fact of having to do that kind of surgical dissection, by default, might work against Trump's tariffs.
Many doctrines explain why this is illegal, like the presumption that Congress speaks clearly when it imposes taxes and duties, and the major questions doctrine.
Yes, the major questions doctrine. It's this idea that when it comes to the really important stuff, decisions of vast economic or political significance, that the Supreme Court shall never simply assume Congress has handed the government some broad or novel power, unless it explicitly says it does. So, if in asking the question, did Congress clearly authorize this much power? The response is, well, technically, we can presume that they might have, because if we look at the use of the word regulate, we can think of this as blah, 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 blah. Then the court's supposed to say, whoa, I'll stop you right there. The answer is no.
It comes down to common sense. It's simply implausible that in enacting IEEPA, Congress handed the president the power to overhaul the entire tariff system and the American economy in the process, allowing him to set and reset tariffs on any and every product from any and every country at any and all times.
So scale matters here, right? It's estimated if the tariffs in place now are allowed to stand, that's $3 trillion in extra revenue by 2035, which might make this question of tariffs a major question. And the major questions doctrine has been invoked successfully where lesser amounts of money are involved. For example, when Joe Biden tried and failed to forgive $400 billion in student loans, citing the pandemic as a national emergency.
The justification is being used for a power to impose tariffs on any product from any country in any amount for any length of time. That seems like, I'm not suggesting it's not there, but it does seem like that's major authority, and the basis for the claim seems to be a misfit. So why doesn't it apply again?
Well, we agree that it's a major power, but it's in the context of a statute that is explicitly conferring major powers, that the point of the statute is to confer major powers to address major questions, which are emergencies. So it'd be unusual to say, look at the statute and say, we're not going to find a major power.
But then it gets into a bit of a circular argument because the question turns once again to why didn't the IEEPA legislation just use the word tariff if that's what it intended? And then you get into the Trump administration's argument that, well, it has a whole bunch of verbs and the word regulate includes tariff. Round and round we go.
So it has a lot of verbs, it has a lot of actions that can be taken under this statute. It just doesn't have the one you want.
At the end of the nearly 3-hour hearing, a majority of Supreme Court justices appeared skeptical about the legality of Trump's tariffs, which suggests they might, in a few weeks or months, ultimately decide to strike them down, as every lower court has done so far. If that happens, the Trump administration has already promised tariffs are here to stay, and there are other legal means to impose them. If the court upholds Trump's tariffs, though, that is a power that once given may be very difficult to claw back.